Welcome back, everybody. We're happy to have you back with us. Greetings. My name's Craig Gottlieb. I lead strategy and consulting for Accenture's aerospace and defense practice here in North America. I'm joined here by Nicole Robinson, who is the Chief Growth Officer for Comtech. And we're going to be getting into a really interesting topic shortly about the merge of the commercialization and defense aspects of the space economy. And so in a moment, we'll be joined by the other panelists, and we look forward to the conversation ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. Hi, pleasure to be here with you today. We have a dynamic discussion and truly impressive lineup of panelists here to discuss the commercialization and defense of space. A lot of changes over the past decade in particular in terms of, what are the roles that military SATCOM systems can and should play? What should commercial systems do and contribute to? Similar in the geointelligence, geospatial domain as well. And we'll even touch upon lunar capabilities today. So quick introduction of our panelists here. Immediately to my right is Dan Jablonsky, who today is the president and CEO of Maxar. Maxar is a U.S.-owned and operated company, a world leader in comprehensive Earth intelligence and space technology solutions. Under Dan's leadership, Maxar Technologies continues to grow its role as a trusted end-to-end partner to U.S. government and commercial industry, focused on expanding its civil and defense business and investing across Earth intelligence and space infrastructure to meet customers' critical mission needs. So glad that you're here, Dan.
Thanks, good to be here.
To his right is Major General Jon Olansen. To your left, General Olson is the mobilization assistant to the Chief of Space Operations at Space Force. He's the lead for JADC2 and ABMS. In this position, he assists the CSO with responsibility to organize, train, and equip space forces, develop and acquire military space systems, and conduct space operations to advance and protect U.S. and allied interests. Thanks so much for being here, General Olson.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. And beside General Olson is Dr. Jon Olansen. Dr. Olansen is the manager of NASA's Gateway program, leading a team of international and commercial partners in the design, development, delivery, and eventual operation of a space station in a unique lunar orbit. The Lunar Gateway is the cornerstone of NASA's Artemis program, architected to establish a sustained human presence in cislunar space, paving the way for human exploration to the moon, Mars, and beyond. Really happy to have you here, Dr. Olansen.
Great to be here. Thank you very much.
So on the subject of commercialization and defensive space, quite keen to have each of our panelists here just share a minute or two based on their depth of experience, knowledge, and the responsibilities they have today, what it means to them. And then we'll go through a series of compelling questions and thought-provoking responses from each of our panelists. So let's start with you first, Dan.
Sure, thanks. And I guess, Maxar's been at this for a while. And we have kind of a unique position as being about half and half commercial and government oriented, defense oriented. So we've been involved in everything from building the space infrastructure that exists for geocommunications, communication satellites, to working on the Artemis program with NASA, to now being part of the space building infrastructure for the Space Development Agency. Along the way, we've also built our own satellites, building our own satellites that do Earth observation missions. And we take that data and use it to serve customers like the National Reconnaissance Office, NGA, partners and allies for U.S. Governments around the world that do things with that data to help their own defense and intelligence missions. So really seeing a great renaissance in space. It's been really fun to see how the massive amounts of capital that are going into it, to be able to build out the infrastructure, to build out the satellites, to build out the new missions that are taking place, both across commercial and defense. And I think we're continuing to see more and more of an intersection between what the governments can use that's already been commercially provided. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
Yeah, I love that you've said that. I mean, if you think about what's happened with satellite communications over the past decade, where we've really come to a place where there's a combined architectural view of MILSATCOM systems, COMSATCOM systems for that true, resilient, redundant assurance of connectivity where and when you need it. geospatial and geoint is quite similar, right? Where we're seeing there's a need to always have access to that critical intelligence where and when it's needed most. So viewing the entirety of MIL intelligence from Earth observation, constellations, and commercial, I think is particularly key. Thank you so much. Yes, General Olson.
Well, Nicole, I definitely agree with everything that Dan said, and I'd like to build on both his comments and your comments. We are truly at a historic time. It is the golden age of commercial space, and I think that brings together the convergence of technology and capital and capabilities, and I think that really spells an incredible opportunity, but also it's simultaneously the most congested and contested period in history for space. And as such, we have a return to great power competition for the domain and much more broadly. And so as we look at that, as we in the United States Space Force, as our guardians, are responsible with the newly defined mission of securing our nation's interests in, from, and to space, that really means creating a safe, stable, secure, and sustainable space domain environment. And that is certainly a team sport. It involves absolute critical partnerships with industry, as well as our international partners and allies. It also involves the interagency community, as well as the institutional and academia elements. So the collective convergence of all those, as we are shaped by this congested and contested domain, and return to great power competition to achieve our mission success, we really need to work much more closely and collaboratively and turn from aspirational to actionable elements. So as we approach our 4th birthday on the 20th of December, the United States Space Force was very much created as the first new service in 75 years, the first service born digital to fulfill that really important mission set for the nation, and serving not just our joint service and coalition partners and allies, but also the incredible ecosystem that we see in the space domain. So this is both for the benefit in space as well as terrestrial benefit, and so I look forward to talking about that much more fully.
Yeah, what a mission you have, coming into this 4th birthday that's coming up just in the next couple of months. And certainly space is congested, it's contested. And you had a senior official from Space Force recently remark in the press about commercial really should be included under this umbrella of what do we think about when we think about defending our space-based assets across both commercial and military. So really dynamic time for Space Force indeed. Thanks so much for that.
Yes.
Yes, and Dr. Olansen, please.
Yes, Nicole, thank you. And continuing to build on the conversation, the collaboration in commercial space, talking from the civil space side of things, where NASA, you go back to the when NASA was first formed, the act in 1958. Since that time, we have been working with commercial entities from our inception, right? Through all of the programs in NASA's history, there is definitely a commercial base. We do some activities in-house, but the build out of commercial activity is been part of NASA's charter from the beginning. And so you look at how those the capabilities have grown from a NASA perspective. We'll talk more about it as we go through this discussion, right? But you see how those capabilities have evolved to where we have a civil space low Earth orbit economy that is burgeoning today, similar to what was just talked about by Dan and General Olson, right? So that is happening on the civil space side as well, and they all interrelate in how we're progressing. Now you bring it to the Gateway program that I'm fortunate to work on with a great team, a great international team that we're doing there, and that's where we're taking that model and bringing it out into cislunar space, starting to build the lunar economy moving forward, right? Taking the lessons learned as we've built that out in LEO and move it into cislunar space. Gateway is the cornerstone of that Artemis program, as you mentioned up front, and Artemis is off and running, right? That's a part for the audience here to understand. We are moving out in all the different aspects of the Artemis program to return humans to the surface of the moon to maintain a capability out in cislunar space and establish the blueprint really for how we will do space exploration beyond the moon, Mars, and beyond.
Fascinating. I mean, it's really exciting to think about a lot of the concepts that NASA has proven at LEO, where they're taking that far beyond now. I mean, even beyond lunar, as we'll get into in a bit with our panelists here, thinking about ways that different modalities, different orbits in space are actually coming together by way of a mesh network. NASA has a really compelling project right now called CSP, where they're actually taking geospatial or satellite imagery data, sending it from those LEO constellations over high throughput SATCOM constellations as a transport layer in space. So really tip of the spear when it comes to NASA's innovation that actually benefits commercial, government, defense, a variety of communities. So really great to see that. And speaking of innovation, our first question here then for each of you, and we'll go to General Olson first. It's clear we are in a new era for the industry today. Can you touch on some of the key innovations that you see playing a central role in the U.S., maintaining its leadership in the space domain?
Well, absolutely, and thank you very much for the question. You know, as we look at the industry sector, I mentioned up front, it's absolutely a critical and interdependent relationship between the Space Force and industry. Certainly, as the smallest service with roughly 16,500 people total, it's absolutely important that we leverage these key partnerships to accomplish our mission. And so, as we look at the industry elements, I'd like to just share a couple of very real current exemplars. And so our Space Development Agency, SDA, has since its inception been focused on much shorter, simpler and capability delivery cycles that are really responsive to the speed of need. And so in just under just over two years, they've managed to in collaboration with traditional and non-traditional industry partners bring forth a couple of tranches of satellites that are part of this proliferated low Earth orbit set of constellations. These are focused on missile warning and missile tracking. We're also going to do space data transport, SDT, and so these are really important elements. And what you've seen is these are accomplishments done collaboratively between the government and industry via other transactional authority contracts. So leveraging the best and most innovative and quick contracting mechanisms to get capability into a much more resilient and robust space architecture. So that's one great example, and Dr. Derek Tournier and his team at SDA are really moving forward. When we talk about the other SDA, space domain awareness, some very near-term actionable results there have been through our Space Delta 2, which is responsible for space domain awareness in its 15th and 19th Space Surveillance Squadrons. We've been working closely to develop, along with commercial industry partners, SDA capabilities in XGEO and cislunar. So I think this is very, very important as we look at the broader mission area of responsibility for the Space Force, extending from 100 kilometers above the surface of the Earth out into infinity. And as Buzz Lightyear would say, it's to infinity and beyond, because that, of course, is really expanding constantly as the cosmos is. So I think that's another great example of true partnership, where certainly we have recognized that NASA is as the U.S. federal government agency that's responsible for the lead exploration activities in and around the moon, certainly with the near rectilinear halo orbit and the exquisite orbits, whether it be the lunar surface or whether even extending out beyond. So we're working closely and collaboratively, following both civil and commercial space leads in that longer extended domain. But just like every point in history, you need to co-evolve the security and the protection posture, not as a bolt-on afterwards, but that's co-evolved as things go forward. But we're definitely closely partnered with both of the entities that these gentlemen represent. I think, I would add, most recently we've seen in the Ukraine and sitting next to Dan, who represents the incredible team at Maxar, we have honestly seen a revolution in military affairs. We've seen a transformative, disruptive new paradigm in the commercial space has brought an incredible array of capabilities, whether they be communications, position, navigation, and timing, whether it be helping with intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, whether it be aiding and assisting with change detection, to a litany of activities. What we have seen with Maxar, Umbra, Capella, ICEYE presenting not just electro-optic, but also synthetic aperture radar. These have been disruptive in helping in helping to deal with the challenges occur with the Ukraine conflict. So another great example. And I would certainly be remiss if I didn't say, SpaceX with Starlink has done an extraordinary job there as well. And most recently in the tragic fires in Hawaii at Lahaina, we along with our industry partner, SpaceX Starlink, we're able to set up Starlink terminals and provide real-time communications for emergency responders and displaced personnel there. So it's really a humanitarian driver that has been so helpful. So as we look at those, I think those are just 3 or 4 really important exemplars of how this critical tie with industry is a part of our paradigm. And it's not only going to be a continuing part, it's going to be an explosively growth-oriented area.
And we think about that, the U.S. maintaining leadership in this particular domain. I mean, I think this is a really compelling set of speakers here. I mean, because you've got, the federal civilian, you've got the defense perspective, we've got the space segment perspective. Of course, at Comtech, the ground systems integration, how does that come together? But you also mentioned a variety of domains. So how are we bringing together the terrestrial and the space-based domain? So if we think about the gentleman to your right there, Dr. Olansen, you think about SDA from C.S.A.S Lunar and, the complexities that you're seeing. How do you feel about the key innovations that you're seeing playing a critical role in the U.S.?
So that's a great question. I actually would broaden it beyond just SDA, right? I think Jon did a great job laying out a lot of the work that's going on and the importance of that collaboration that exists between federal and commercial and international from that perspective as well. But from an innovation perspective, when we look at following on again what General Olson said about leading that civil space, leading that exploration, when we look at that, there are a lot of things that we need to develop in order to continue to expand that exploration capability. The whole point of the Artemis establishing the blueprint to move out beyond C.S.A.S lunar space establishes the capabilities that we actually need to live off of Earth. And those capabilities are far-reaching and broad. Communications and navigation is one piece. We'll touch more on that as we go today. But there are many other areas too that we need to look for innovations that we're continuing to work with industry partners at different types of innovative activities or technologies that can help us. If you think about getting out to C.S.A.S lunar space itself, once you move out of LEO, just the energy requirements to move mass out into that space go up substantially. And then you're talking about going beyond the moon. So propulsion advancements, capabilities, right? That's a key area that we definitely want to look at. And from a gateway perspective, our initial launch, when we launch our first 2 elements, which include the power propulsion element that Maxar is providing and the habitation logistics outpost, the first habitat that is being provided by Northrop Grumman, those will launch together on a SpaceX Falcon Heavy. The propulsive element for that is a solar electric propulsion capability that Maxar is bringing to the table in conjunction with Aerojet. And that's gonna be what then propels that initial capability out into lunar orbit and then maintains that orbit for us for at least 15 years and beyond, demonstrating that highly efficient solar electric capability at a level that has never been flown before, right? At power levels that we just have not done. So advancing that type of technology, critical for what we need to do in the future as an example. But you can kind of go across spacecraft and look at the things that we might need. Power generation, power distribution, power management at low mass ratios how do we advance those capabilities? How do we build those capabilities out in cislunar space on the lunar surface when you might have a lot of shadow? We want to spend a lot of time on the South Pole, right? How do we generate the power systems we need? How do we deal with thermal environments? Those are all areas that we have to go pursue. There is a separate aspect that I do want to touch on. Autonomous operations is an area that we spend a lot of time talking about. We go to cislunar space. There's maybe not as much of a have to have for autonomy, but when you go beyond that, you're really talking about delays that especially for human spacecraft, you're going to need to have some autonomous capabilities for as you go beyond cislunar space. So we're building within Gateway, we're actually building in an autonomous capability to actually control the station when we're out there in the near rectilinear halo orbit that General Olson mentioned. So we have that we're actually doing in-house with support contractors, but we're going to create the technology that we then work with commercial entities to build on those capabilities. So that's kind of how we balance some of the commercial integration that we do across the NASA portfolio. There are also several, and I didn't mention the human element. I have to make sure I mention the human element, right? You have life support systems. We have people on board. So how you handle life support systems to have crew on board for extended periods of time where resupply isn't your answer. In low Earth orbit, resupply is relatively straightforward. Spaceflight is hard. I don't want to get out of it, right? There are difficulties associated with that, but you can get up to the International Space Station and back down, and we do that on a regular cadence for resupply. You go out on a Mars mission, and even you go cislunar, the resupply is much more difficult. And how do we deal with the human elements and all of the life support systems that are required to keep humans alive? And then finally, right, I want to mention the mechanisms. NASA has many mechanisms associated with how you go about doing those things, from small business interactions, so SBIRs and STTRs to build, to bring small businesses in. We have a tipping point program that invests in technologies that are out there in development, whether it be on weld improvements, right? Or you go back to the life support system capabilities. All of those things are viable under tipping point. And then we have a number of collaborative agreements as well, where we provide facilities, access to facilities, where companies can come in and work with us on expanding their capabilities and use our state-of-the-art facilities to help them do that. So there's a variety of different mechanisms as well that we use to bring the commercial together into what we're trying to do to lead exploration out into deep space.
Yeah, that's incredibly compelling. In particular, that commercial component, and how do you continue to incentivize small business to lean in and innovate and really continue to think forward? What's the next gen iteration? So we think about commercial and some of the changes at Maxar, even more recent weeks. You're always evolving and finding a way to stay ahead of the curve. So would love, Dan, your feedback as well. What are the key innovative topics that you're seeing?
Yeah, sure. I think first, the one that I've been focusing on is just industrialization of space. We've gone from just experimentation or just military type use cases to massive industrialization of space. We've done that with, across the industry with different launch capabilities, the speed at which the types and numbers of constellations and assets are being deployed. And that's the kind of the leaping pad that we'll use for the eventual industrialization of lunar-based orbits and out into interplanetary type activities as well. So the way that the commercial industry has moved up a notch, I think, has been really, really exciting. The speed at which capabilities are coming online, the innovation cycles that are taking place to be able to develop that and to be able to support that infrastructure, I think has been really exciting. At I think, very efficient cost points. And that's where we're seeing the interest and the capital flowing into the sector to be able to underwrite those kind of processes from a commercial basis. So I think that's been really exciting. The second is the speed at which things are moving, not just up into space now, but in which the data relays and the data movements are happening. The super data highways that are being built, the laser communications channels, the laser links, the way eventually I think we'll have not just an Earth-based cloud infrastructure and transoceanic cables, but we're going to have space-based cloud infrastructure as well, where we'll be having, the data movement, the data storage, the data generation happening in these multimodal domains. And that then changes the game in terms of what happens here on Earth and how fast it happens. You won't wait to say, oh, we've got a satellite pass in 3 days or 3 hours. You'll be talking about seconds and milliseconds for information transmitting about our planet. So the types of pollution monitoring we can do, methane detection monitoring of the environmental aspects, the types of assets that are being deployed and how fast they can move information around about conflict situations like Ukraine. What happens with that information when it moves to some place, and then the types of digital simulation training and geopositioning environments that are starting to take place from those space-based assets as well. So it's all moving into these super data relay and cloud-enabled environments. Mm-hmm. And how then we use that information is like another leap in the speed at which we're able to do things. So I'm really excited about that. I think that we need to continue to innovate on the legal and the regulatory side so that we don't have just a Wild West atmosphere as we go out and industrialize space like this. But it's really exciting to see the leaps and the bounds and the changes that are being made there.
It really is. And I think, one of the things that you brought up about the operational environment, now speed is king. Speed is queen. Let's go with that. But it's regal, really, it's regal. Yeah. It's, having access to critical insight where and when needed most is critical. I mean, if there's a change detection, if there's intelligence about an object or an area of interest, having that intelligence in 2 days maybe is interesting. In 2 hours, now that's actionable. That's something you can do. These laser links, these, moving analytics capabilities, even on board space-based assets, that's a game changer in terms of speed. So really exciting.
Well, and I think even we're not even talking 2 hours anymore. From a satellite going overhead, we've been working with the 82nd Airborne and the folks down at West Fort Bragg. I got to get the new name right, correct. But from a satellite going overhead to data being moved into ground systems to artificial intelligence being run over it for object detection identification, we're talking about sequencing down into tens of minutes. Sensor to shooter target solutions with intersatellite relay links. You get down into the 120 second type time zones, which is that's game changing for any environment, particularly if you're downlinking into theater and doing that kind of activity.
And if I could build on that, that's absolutely at the core of what we are envisioning for the combined joint all-domain command and control. That's really the ability to sense, make sense, and act at the speed of need and relevance in a contested environment across all the domains. It's a really wicked hard problem, but at the core of that are two things. Space is such an enabler. It's the true conduit between all those domains and services across legacy to very modern systems and across our coalition partners and industry allies. So that's absolutely true. The second thing, which I'd love to underscore and highlight and foot stomp that Dan said, is it's really all about the data. And when we talk about data, of course, 80 to 85% of AI, ML, DL, or artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning, it's all about the data formatting, the provenance, the integrity validation, the cleansing, getting everything set to crank. But we must have machine to machine speed to operate at the relevance that we need to. That involves aerial networks, that involves space edge node compute and mesh networks in space. It involves a broad systems of systems ecosystem. And when we look at that data, it's useless by itself till we turn it into understandable wisdom or knowledge or actionable information to drive decision advantage and information advantage. And that is what is going to separate the winners and the losers, the success or the non-success mission outcomes. And so this is the modern paradigm. And I think as we look at that, of course, the 21st century information age, and that is the convergence between space and air. So when we talk commercialization and defense of space, they're absolutely all about data at its core.
Yeah, I love that. And let's stay with you as well, because you mentioned the JADC2 program. So would love to get your perspective in terms of how is industry helping to contribute to that effort? And then we'll ask the same as well of Dr. Olansen on Gateway. So if we could start with you.
Well, sure. I appreciate the question. I'm privileged and honored to be a part of a great team. We actually have operations and acquisition and technology deeply intertwined. The Secretary of Defense has laid out our Department of the Air Force Advanced Battle Management System, as well as what we call the C3BM, Command Control Communications Battle Management. That's an integrating PEO that's led by Brigadier General Luke Cropsey, and of course his Architecture and Systems Engineering lead is Dr. Brian Tipton. Along with, on the operations side, I'm the Space Force Operations lead, and we have Brigadier General Dan Flack Clayton as the Air Force operations element. And so together we work collectively. That portfolio under this integrating PEO for acquisition, it's more than 55 programs and $21.5 billion. So this is truly a mega systems of systems effort. But as part of that acquisition, as part of that vigorous effort to move quickly and develop, instead of just PowerPoint slides and concepts, actionable, implementable elements that we can experiment with, prototype with, bring into the training and the tactics, techniques, and procedures environment to hone and evolve those all on our very fast cadence. We are working in earnest, and of course, at the core of that is industry. And so we have we've adopted an acquisition paradigm that onboards into an IDIQ contract, or indefinite delivery indefinite quantity contract, where we can bring people. We have over 200 on board, and so for our digital infrastructure consort, we have seven companies that were selected, pulling from a rich and diverse set of capabilities. So collaboratively, we can bring them together and execute very quickly. So that's just one exemplar of how we're driving in that. As part of our broader Space Force efforts, we're also trying to in order to bring a level of standards and normalize capabilities, we're trying to drive common lexicon across not just the U.S. Department of Defense, but also across the civil and commercial enterprises and our partners and allies. So common lexicon and language and vernacular, driving normalization of space operations, normalization of tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs. And so that is how we're trying to get after that in a way. And we really look at 5 focal categories. Those are our data, services, hardware, software, and networks. And I think when you look at that encapsulated space, that covers everything that it takes to make sense, and act at the speed of need and relevance. And this is the #1 Department of the Air Force priority. Secretary Kendall has also outlined the 7 operational imperatives, things that we must do as the Department of the Air Force, which is Air and Space Force, in order to achieve our goals and objectives in great power competition, largely focused with China as our pacing competitor. And so as we look at that, these are the absolutely essential transformative elements that we must go do. First among those, operational imperative 1 is a resilient space order of battle. So space is first and foremost by necessity. The second one is the one I co-lead for operations, and that's operationally optimized, carefully selected words, combined joint all-domain command and control, advanced battle management system, and C3BM. That is, again, the core of stitching everything together and turning that into decision advantage. And at the bottom line, that is what we're really focused on. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. And of course, commercial is an ingredient into that ecosystem as well. When we think about what you're doing, Dr. Olansen, with Gateway, what's the role that the commercial industry contributes in that regard?
That's great. And I appreciate that, being able to follow up with Jon, General Olsen here, and what he's described. And I think you look at the panel that's up here and the ability to talk, you get Dan gets to sit there and talk about, represent kind of the commercial industry that works in both civil and other government space arenas, right? And so you get kind of the breadth of commercial participation. When you look at what NASA is trying to do, I'll hit Gateway in a second, but overall, as I mentioned earlier, NASA with the building out the civil commercial space economies is what we've been pursuing for quite some time, right? Since our inception, really. And you can kind of go back to the early days for your analog, right? Military aircraft leading to commercial aircraft capabilities, right? So that analog of building out capabilities that then create industries is a lot of what NASA has done through its history. Low Earth orbit is really at that apex right at this point in time. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Building out those capabilities for commercial commercial civil purposes in low Earth orbit is also a key piece of NASA's strategy. We have commercial LEO development activity that's going on right now. Multiple companies involved in establishing commercial space station entities, in addition to the other activities, commercial activities that have been going on. So being able to transition from a government-led international space station capability into a commercial LEO environment with human access and all of the different benefits that provides has been a key tenet of where NASA has been headed with building out that LEO space economy. And again, we build on that then for the cislunar space economy that we've been talking about as well. It's taking those lessons and then applying them across Artemis. Gateway is a piece of that, but you look across everything it takes to land humans on the surface of the moon. We have multiple programs with multiple different commercial partnerships involved in actually executing that, right? You've got the Space Launch System rocket, its activity, right? It's the largest, most powerful rocket that's flown to date, right? And so we have that propels the mass that we need out into cislunar space. And you've got their partners, right? Boeing and what they're working on with the C.L.A.S. You've got Lockheed Martin working on the Orion space capsule, what will actually carry the crew to and from Earth, right? You've got within our spacesuit development, and you've got Axiom building spacesuits. You've got Collins building spacesuits. You've got commercial entities working on advanced spacesuit capabilities that will work both in space and on the lunar surface. So we're looking at those different types of opportunities. We've got human landing capability being developed. We've got both SpaceX and Blue Origin working those activities right now to get humans from Gateway and Orion right down to the lunar surface and back again. So we have a bunch of these activities. We also have ground system activities. We have Bechtel developing our mobile launch platform capabilities, right? We have a bunch of commercial activities going on just to be able to get out into cislunar space and be able to execute it. That creates a starting point, right? For that commercial activity, for that lunar space economy. But that's the getting humans to the surface, but there's still more to that story as well. So you've got the commercial lunar payload services as a part of what we're trying to do as well, to understand what's going on with the lunar surface, to bring out capabilities, science back for what we need to understand where we're going and what might exist in those different regions. So we've got launches coming up within that C.L.A.S program later this year. So those are all avenues for commercial participation in the Artemis program. And that's just once we establish that foothold, then you've created capabilities where commercial activity can build on what we're doing. And then NASA is simply a part of what we're doing out in cislunar space, just like right now, we're a part of what's happening in LEO anymore.
I love that. I mean, when you think about, and I also love the fact that you mentioned ground systems, because often that's the afterthought. I mean, we're talking here about LEO and MEO and GEO and lunar based capabilities. I mean, it's multi-orbit, it's multi-frequency, it's multi-modality in the case of, data fusion for geospatial capabilities. What has to happen in terms of the innovation on the ground and at the edge, to be able to receive and communicate the insights with the speed that Dan was talking about earlier. So truly a dynamic time. And it's interesting that you mentioned NASA as a part of, when so often it's the tip of the spear, you sort of, pick that balloon to burst for the rest of the community. And we all take advantage of that. So that's really excellent. Let's shift to hybrid space architecture. So there's clearly a shift that we're experiencing. A lot of it has come up over the course of the first portion of this discussion here about that pivot towards hybrid space architectures. Let's talk about some of the key benefits and challenges of those architectures as well. And maybe let's go in reverse order this time, starting with you, Dan.
Sure. Well, first off, I think it's exciting that we're using these type of hybrid architectures, because you get an efficiency level that you want if you create completely separate modalities. But some of the challenges are how you interface them, how you do protection mechanisms of them, cybersecurity protocols, who builds what and in what what order as these things come online. So I'm excited that we've got the advancements there, but there will be some ironing out as we go along the way here that I think is going to be quite a bit of work to do still. But if you kind of General Jon made a couple of comments earlier about some of the pacing items that we're dealing with, and we're not just doing these types of technologies in a vacuum, right? I think there's a huge advantage for the U.S. as it continues to industrialize space to be first and foremost there, just like we are in many tech areas. That's an advantage to the country. It's an advantage to our industry. It's an advantage to our employee base and the technology that gets developed, or those kind of things. But China is a pacing item in terms of the some don't like the term, but the militarization of the strategic uses and aspects of space, who gets to go where, who gets to do what, whether you get use of the environment or you're denied use of the environment. And by using hybrid architectures, by partnering with commercial, by being efficient and fast and nimble, I think the U.S. has a much better chance of maintaining dominance in those environments.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I mean, when you think about some of the features of resiliency and redundancy that you mentioned there, it kind of puts the end user in a place to say, do I care what orbit this connectivity is delivered and which frequency? No, they shouldn't care. They just need to make sure that it's there.
Know, right?
You may never know, and maybe they don't need to know. That the GeoInt that you're providing, the insights that you're providing, do they care if it's SAR or optical or RF mapping? No, they need the answer. They need to be able to make that decision. So interesting perspective. Thanks so much. General.
Yeah, just building on that, let's face it, you ask many people, hey, what does GPS do for me? And they go, why do I need that? I got it right here on my phone. It tells me exactly where to go. That is the quintessential example of the ubiquitous benefit of space. You get your weather every day leveraging space. You pay for gas at the pump leveraging GPS PNT timing. You navigate to where you need to go with GPS. And so that's an exemplar of a original military system capability that has for all intents and purposes the Space Force. If we look at our stewardship and responsibility for operation of the GPS satellite constellation, we're technically the only service that generates far more revenue by orders of magnitude than and provides economic benefit for all of humanity and society, not just Americans, far beyond the cost of our service. So I think that's an interesting point. Another point I'd like to pick up on what Dan said is really key. This is not a whole of government. It's not just NASA and NRO and the Space Force, the 14 departments and agencies that touch space. This is a whole of nation approach. And so industry is absolutely indispensable and critical in that. And frankly, the nexus of spending and innovation is there. It's up to us to do the inherently, define what's inherently governmental, what's inherently military, help chart those policies and those authorities and those directives, and provide a clarity of the structure. But then we need to absolutely unleash the entrepreneurial spirit, the competitive, robust, dynamic industrial base that we have in the United States. And I think it is our golden age of space within the US, but it's also partnering with our allies and like-minded thinkers in terms of, those who share the same sense of the international order, the rule of law, the respect for humanity and rights. Those are important paradigms. And I think it's really important that the United States lead and be a first mover advantage. You know, whether that be in communications, whether that be in space traffic management, much like English is the international language based upon the International Civil Aviation Organization, that has had profound impact in helping to shape that system. I so too believe that is vitally important to shape in a collaborative, inclusive, enlightened way the environs of space. So I think there's some very important roles for government in there, whether it be at the National Security Council, the National Space Council, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, or whether it's through congressional action, as we saw with the critically important legislation passed previously to enable discussing exploitation of space resources and the ability to for business. You've got to have a stable risk environment for investment. And so that is a core element. It is essential for a profit and loss decision to invest and engage and capitalize markets to have that safe, stable, secure, and sustainable environment. And that is what the Space Force and our other partners across not just the interagency government, but also in this whole of nation approach need to nail down. It is a co-evolution, but the time is absolutely now. You know, this also ties for all the segments: the ground, the space, the launch, and the user segments. So I think that is a critically important endeavor for us as we look at the international relationships that we had. I think or that we have. Those continue to evolve on a very rapid pace. Our chief of space operations just got back yesterday from Japan. We continue to engage with Europe. We continue to engage. I'll be going to Norway here, as Norway already has Svalbard, which is a very critical polar satellite downlink capability. They're going to be opening their brand new first spaceport, Andoya spaceport, here this fall. So I think that's an exemplar of another great partnership where we add resiliency and robustness, dissimilar redundancy, and a spirit of sharing, collaborative cooperation, all to make sure we're, again, safe, stable, secure environment.
Yeah, that's great. The financial stability component too, in terms of the industrial base. I mean, we've seen over the span of the last year or so with the shakeup of Silicon Valley Bank and the impact it's had on the small business community. A lot of the innovation is coming from Silicon Valley. It's coming from these startups. So, maybe a topic for another panel, but really interesting to think about. How do we continue to incentivize those small businesses to keep leaning forward and creating the next generation technologies that need to be incorporated into those hybrid space architectures? It's a challenge that I think in the US we have on our table.
You are absolutely correct. For that very reason, we're doing our fifth year of the State of the Space Industrial Base report, and largely in collaboration with the Defense Innovation Unit, which of course is headquartered in Silicon Valley. That is part of our effort to actually bring together a forum, and we do several of those locations around the country focused on whether it be launch or power or spaceport capabilities that are enabling, to bring an opportunity to have first-person inputs from all the disparate, large, medium, small, traditional, non-traditional providers. And so it's a great opportunity to bring those together. And each year we've seen a steadily increasing amount of participants. I think that's a reflection of both the quality and the need to have a forum to provide input. So we do that effort again, not just across the DoD, but NASA has been a great partner, and Department of Commerce. As we look at the U.S. Chamber, as we look at the Department of Commerce, Office of Space Commercialization, the Bureau of Industry and Security, I think these are key exemplars of how, from a government side, we can listen, be active listeners, but also active executors of those smart and informed policies and directives and authorities.
And as you think about, that's great about that report as well. We think about some of, just switching topics here, some of the technologies around satellite imagery, geospatial intelligence, data and analytics, and the role that they play now in those broader architectures. A lot of those new technologies and capabilities have come from the startup community, in particular in the past 10 years. So it'd be great to talk a little bit about how you're incorporating that layer, the satellite imagery, the geospatial, the data processing and analytics into the mission as well. And maybe let's start with Dr. Olansen, if that's something looking up.
Yeah. So there's probably more future activities, right? From our perspective to get to your question. If I can segue real quick though with what Jon was just talking about, because he made three really beautiful points. I think they're talking about the whole of nation, the role of the international partnerships, and then the risk discussion that he was talking about. And I will tell you from our perspective, from my perspective with Gateway and what we're doing, the whole of nation piece, what we're trying to do, we talked to the lunar economy and making sure that there is a commercial aspect. We're talking about crews visiting both Gateway and the lunar surface relatively small periods of time in a given year, right? So at this point in time, you're talking 30 days on Gateway. You're talking up to 30 days, maybe on the surface eventually, maybe 60 days on Gateway. So the rest of the time, you have assets that are available for science, available for other commercial uses. So you have those things where commercial entities can really play in to what you're doing. And we, like I said earlier, want to be part of that, not the whole answer eventually. So there's that piece, the whole of nation. The international partnerships is a really important piece as well, right? So with Gateway, we have components of the primary structure for the station being provided by ESA. They're providing two different modules for us, right? We have the Japanese JAXA providing all of our life support capability within that European module, as well as some logistics capability in the future to carry logistics up to the station. We have Canada providing the robotic arm that we'll have on the outside of that station. So that international partnership matters. And then the risk-based piece as well that Jon was talking about, by advancing the capabilities we have through time, and you can see it in the commercial LEO aspect, taking what we've learned and being able to make that available to commercial industry so that they can actually build on risks that we've already bought down in order to execute their activities is a part of what we're doing. So when you take that to then back to your question, right, and the availability of satellite capabilities, right? We are looking at technologies. What do we need to do from a communication and navigation perspective out in cislunar space? What are the things we need to do? We actually have our scan, our capability within NASA that's building out a LunaNet activity to build an understanding standards, basically interoperable standards for entities to actually work within cislunar space, to be able to communicate and navigate within cislunar space. So that activity is ongoing as we speak.
Appreciate that you shared that with us as well, because I don't think I was prepared with a question to bring that point out. So I'm really glad that we had that moment. I know we're coming to the end here. So Dan, I'd like to come to you and ask from Maxar's perspective, what have we left off?
Gosh, we've covered a lot of territory. I think just the continued partnership, but Jon was highlighting it between the U.S. and allied nations as well. It is not just a U.S. issue. Space is all the nations of the world have access to it eventually, and definitely get use from it. But how we partner, how we work with our allies, how we create the right legal and regulatory and treaty frameworks to be able to do that, I think is really fantastic. It's been just great to see how NASA's led on that front, particularly with the Gateway program.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. Well, on the subject of commercialization and defensive space, I think it's absolutely clear, General Olson's point there earlier, that it's not just a whole of government from a Fed, civilian, and defense perspective, but it's a whole of nation. You know, the industrial base has a really important role to play. as does the international community, our partners, our allies. It's a critical undertaking when we think about the broader defensive space. So this has been a wonderful, I'd say, chapter 1, because I feel like this could be an entire series. Thank you so much, Dr. Olansen, General Olson, and of course, Dan Jablonsky. This has been so compelling and thought-provoking. We appreciate your time, appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.